There are innumerable religious claims in the world. Religions appear on the scene right and left. I come from California, the land of the fruits and the nuts, and in California the number of religions probably exceeds the number of people. Now, it's one thing to make a religious claim. It's a totally different thing to demonstrate that claim. As in the field of law, anybody can file suit, but winning the case is a very different matter. And in the case of Christianity, we have claims that have to do with history, with historical fact, with certain events which, if they took place, the Christian faith is vindicated. If they didn't take place, it's false. And Christianity has been willing to put itself on the line in that respect across the centuries. At the very beginning, a rabbinic lawyer and convert to Christianity by the name of Paul said, "If Christ isn't risen from the dead, we are of all men most miserable." In other words, if the resurrection didn't take place, Christianity is false. If the resurrection did take place, Christianity turns out to be true. So, history is the field in which we can test the claims of Christianity.
Most people right off the bat would say, listen, but you've got innumerable problems. You're talking history. You're talking the Bible as the evidence. You're talking about disciples that were a part of writing that were all buddy-buddy with Jesus. And then I've heard all this modern textual criticism. Where would you start in laying out the evidence for a thinking person that says, listen, I've heard all that. What about that?
Well, in the first place, since Christianity came on the scene in history, the first question will have to do with the documents by which we know about it. How good are these docs? If the New Testament documents were written by drunken monks in the 10th century, Christianity is in deep trouble. But they weren't. They were written by eyewitnesses of the events themselves or by associates of eyewitnesses. So this material is what a historian would call primary source material, what a lawyer would call non-hearsay. Then, having looked at the documents, we want to see what they have to say about Jesus. Do they present him as a simple prophet, as a kind of Jewish Boy Scout helping little old ladies across the Sea of Galilee, or do they present him as a bit more than that? As a matter of fact, we'll discover that they present Jesus as God Almighty, as very God of very God, as the creeds put it. Then we have to ask ourselves, was he really that kind of person? Because he could claim such and yet not be that. So we turn to the central evidence presented to show that he was the person he claimed to be, namely his resurrection from the dead. So it seems to me we want to proceed along three lines. First of all, the documents. Second, what the documents have to say about Jesus. And then the evidence that what they say about Jesus is correct, specifically his resurrection.
All right, now you're a trial attorney, and the fact is that when you sift evidence, you said there are eyewitnesses. Now, I think this comes as a surprise to many people. Eyewitnesses to Jesus Christ? Come on, who were they?
Well, for example, the first gospel was written by Matthew Levi, a tax collector, who became an apostle, a disciple of Jesus, and who wrote on the basis of his own observation of what Jesus said and did. The fourth gospel was written by John, who was the youngest of the disciples and lived the longest. We have independent evidence that he died in the city of Ephesus around the year 95. We have records of two of his students where they indicate to us that John was in fact the author of that book, and he passed on information to them about the authorship of the other major Gospels. The second Gospel was written by John Mark, who was a companion of Peter, one of the apostles, and Luke's Gospel was written by the physician who accompanied the Apostle Paul on his missionary journeys. And Paul was accepted by the original 11 apostles as a legitimate apostle in his own right.
And then, of course, you've got James and Peter.
Those as well.
That's right. So you have 7 eyewitnesses that said they were either there or checked out other witnesses and gave us information, which is what we have in the New Testament. But then I can hear many of the folks that are listening in right now, they would be saying, but Dr. Montgomery, you know those were all the disciples of Jesus. Those were his friends. Didn't they pad the case? I mean, didn't they really kind of make it up and lift Jesus up? And we really don't have any skeptics in the group there. We just have good friends of Jesus. How do we know that they actually are telling us the truth about what Jesus actually did?
That's one of the central questions, and it seems to me we need to face that directly. And there are two things we need to see about it. First of all, these people did not start out as believers. In fact, after Jesus' crucifixion, they were back at the old fishing nets. They quite obviously had not arrived at the belief reflected in the writings that they produced later. What changed their minds was the resurrection itself. We see this in the case of Thomas, who wouldn't believe unless he could touch the nail prints in Jesus' hands and thrust his hand into his side after the resurrection. That's the first thing. Second thing is, it doesn't really make any difference whether a writer about Jesus or a writer about anything else is a friend of the person that he writes about if he produces his writings in an environment where there are hostile witnesses. The fact is that the early apostles went out and presented what we have in the New Testament in a primarily Jewish audience, particularly in the synagogues. And the Jewish religious leaders had been the primary opponents of Jesus' message. Now, it is inconceivable that the disciples, friends of Jesus or not, could have gotten away with incorrect information about Jesus in the presence of hostile witnesses who had themselves had contact with Jesus' life and who had what we lawyers call means, motive, and opportunity to destroy